everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to spend a little bit of time and talk about the Spear of Shojin, as I know a lot of people have been very upset with it of late and are kind of wondering why did Riot even bother putting this in the game. Now, first and foremost, if you're not aware, Spear of Shojin was an item Riot were playing around with a while back in order to give divers and generally fighters a little bit more options in order to survive in fights and deal a little bit more damage. Now, this was accompanied by the Atma's Reckoning item as well. These were a couple of items that Riot were experimenting with, and eventually they decided, well, you know what? These don't really make a whole lot of sense to include. Conqueror's already done a good job of buffing up divers and just generally bruisers, so we don't have to add these two items to the game. Now, they did eventually add them to the game regardless in the Nexus Blitz game mode, because that has all sorts of crazy items in it in the first place, so that was added there, and players were able to play around with it, and Riot were still kind of thinking about, well, maybe we want to put them on Summoner's Rift, maybe we don't. Eventually, the conclusion was, you know what, Spear of Shojin fits very many of the same sort of design space as Steric's Gauge. They both grant you shields when you're low on HP and sort of help give you a little bit more survivability in fights. Now, Spear of Shojin was a little bit more offensive-oriented because I believe it built out of a BF sword, but in general, Riot said, there's not much of a reason for us to have the exact same two items in the game, and especially if players decide that they want to both stack them, because those items did stack back in the day. So they essentially said, okay, so we're not going to be releasing the Spear of Shojin, at the very least, as is. Now, this is back when Essence Reaver had the Essence Flare ability that allowed you to, after casting your ult, you had to auto-attack within the next few seconds, and if you did, then you gained Essence Flare, which caused your auto-attacks to refund a whole bunch of your basic ability cooldowns every time you auto-attack, which means that champions like Master Yi, for example, could press R, get the first auto-attack in, and then every auto-attack after that is going to be massively reducing their cooldowns, allowing Yi to get a ton of alpha strikes. It allows champions like Jax to get in a lot more counter-strikes, a lot more empowered auto-attacks, all sorts of crazy shenanigans. And it was so good, even, that champions like Riven and Renekton, who don't even need mana, so they're wasting some of the stats on the old Essence Reaver, were building it regardless because, oh my god, Renekton able to hit his buttons a lot more in fights, like, you know, sign me up, especially given that his W counts as 3 auto attacks if he casts it while empowered. That massively reduces all of his cooldowns. Holy crap, we have to get in on this. So this was a big deal. A lot of players were building this item, but it wasn't generally regarded by a lot of players as being particularly degenerate, even though they didn't really like it. But that's because a lot of times the Riven and the Jax and even champions that didn't really care about mana or need to build mana were essentially wasting stats. Sure, Jax and Yi were at least getting some value from the mana because maybe they don't own themselves as easily, but generally speaking, they were wasting stats. And Renekton and Riven definitely were wasting stats on this item. So sure, they got a powerful passive ability, but they also weren't just going to be running you over because they were being a little bit gold inefficient with the purchase. Now, this was a very interesting design space. I don't know if it was necessarily super degenerate. It does feel a little cheesy, especially with champions like Jax, who just get to counter-strike all the time and get so many stuns and just so long where your AD carry can't hit them at all. But generally, I don't think it was necessarily the worst thing in the world to have, as champions were wasting stats. But then Riot decided, well, we really like this, and we know we're going to be reverting Essence Reaver, because players, basically the old one is super niche, and it's not going on Marksman, so when we refactor Marksman builds, we're going to bring back the old Essence Reaver, but we like the new one too, because of the interesting interactions it gives. So they decided to rework the Spear of Shojin, so they added that to the game, but they reworked it so that it now grants essentially the Essence Flare ability to champions that build it. But the disadvantage now, or rather the advantage I should say, is that the Spear of Shojin does not have any mana involved in it whatsoever. In fact, I believe it's Kindle Gem and BF Sword. So that's a ton of damage, a ton of health, and cooldown reduction, which is everything that manaless fighters really want, because it gives them so much CDR, it gives them so much damage, and on top of that, they have the really powerful passive like I was talking about. Now, this is roundabouts where people really started complaining. Now, beforehand, there were already some complaints leveled at the Essence Flare passive because of how ridiculous it sort of made champions like Riven and Renekton, because it's like, wow, they're wasting stats in this item, but they're still going to build it because it just makes them completely stupid. They always have their defensive ability, they always have just a ton of damage available to them, their cooldowns are always up, this is ridiculous, and their ults are usually a short enough cooldown that they will have it available as well. So But now that they have a gold efficient item that they can build that gives them all stats that they want on top of the really good passive, now people are starting to complain and say, wow, this is really stupid. Why are you trying to keep this ability in the game? Now, to a certain extent, I empathize with these players. I do think that that's a little silly. I think that some of the Essence Flare plays you see made, obviously, these are kind of being cherry-picked by community members to say, see, look how broken this is. But I do think that Essence Flare is really, really good on these characters, and it makes them a lot harder to deal with, because short of just being able to chain CC them, which is something that's really hard to do in solo queue games and solo queue environments, just because the communication isn't all there, it can be really hard to deal with. Now, I do think, however, that despite how bad people consider Essence Flare to be, and despite how horrendous people find the new Spear of Shojin, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because first and foremost, the old one was not going to be released. I do think I agree with Riot in that it does kind of fulfill the same niche that Sterix Gauge does, and this is coming from a guy who plays a lot of bruisers and loves new items to help me, you know, stay alive in fights, do more damage. Atma's Reckoning, I still am salivating at the mouth thinking of that item. Really want that to get introduced to the game, but I understand that it probably may not be. But so, Spear of Shojin, in this old iteration, I just don't think was actually going to be a thing that could happen. Conversely, however, I do feel like if you, the new Essence Flare ability, the new Spear of Shojin, I'm getting a little bit turned around here, but the new Spear of Shojin that Riot just added to the game with the Essence Flare passive on it, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for the game, because yeah, the ability is a little broken, but the point being is that now Riot have it on an item that's specifically designed for bruisers. This isn't bruisers taking an item that really wasn't meant for them and abusing it because they found a way to do that. This is instead an item specifically that they are intended to buy. They are the audience that are supposed to get this item. And what it means is that it's going to be actually balanceable for Riot, probably. Because all the stats are supposed to be on bruisers. Its intended users are bruisers. So if it ends up being too weak on other classes but right on bruisers, well, that's perfect. That'll totally work out for their purposes. And yes, I do think that it could potentially need nerfs, but the advantage of doing this is it's not going to hurt the sort of marksmen that are intended to use the item anymore. You can just straight nerf it. And I think that there are ways to change it so that it will be a little bit better, a little bit easier to use. I think first and foremost, you can reduce the window in which you have to get the Essence Flare off, because you have to auto attack once in order to actually get the ability to the passive to trigger. So you could reduce the window. Right now it's sitting at 8 seconds, but you could reduce that window to, let's say, 4 seconds. So as opposed to a champion that, like E, who wants to press R and then run you down afterwards, he has to be a lot more close on the timing, pressing R and then immediately going into the fight, because if he presses it too early, he's going to miss out on the Essence Flare, especially because he has to wait for the whole animation of Alpha Strike to wear off before he can auto attack, and usually that's what he's going to use to gap close, for example. The other thing you can do is reduce the amount of cooldown reduction that the Essence Flare passive is going to give the champion. So instead of reducing, I don't remember even how much it is, but you could have it even down into half-second or quarter-second increments, so that champions at very high attack speed can still use it to get cooldown reduction, but champions at very low attack speed that don't build a lot like Riven won't be able to use it as effectively because they just won't get that many cooldowns. I think there are options to balance this, and I think it is balanceable because Riot know that these bruisers that build it aren't being punished by building an item that they don't really need and building stats that they don't really need. So those are just my kind of impressions on this. I know it's a frustrating item to deal with, especially when you do see champions like Riven just kind of mashing all of their buttons all of the time and killing everybody because they have no cooldowns anymore. But I do think that, in general, this item is going to be a better addition for the game. It's just going to require possibly some basically make-up work from Riot in order to get it into a slightly better spot, to get it into a slightly more balanced place in the game. But we'll have to see what ends up happening in the future. Go ahead and let me know what you guys think of the new Spear of Shojin down in the comment section below. If you think it's horrendously overpowered, if you think it's potentially a good addition to the game, and what you would do if you think it needs nerfs. What would you do to nerf it? Removing it, I don't think is going to be an option at this point, but how would you change it so that it's not quite as effective? If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like, and if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. And if you're looking for Grab the Lantern content, you can check out my blog, which is linked down in the description. I upload an article just about each and every single day for your enjoyment. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.